a bank or a financial institute. But you know, this stuff is like insurance. When do you want to buy fire insurance? Just the instant the smoke is coming out the window, but not a day before then. Now, in this cyber security realm, you know, your neighbor's house has caught fire, the house across the street has caught fire, so there's a lot of fires going on. You'd think they would, and there is a lot of cybersecurity activity in the financial community. But it's our belief and our approach, and Homeland Security and Department of Defense agrees with us that it has to be hardware-based. Software-based protections just aren't working. And it's hard to argue that they are, because you open the paper and almost weekly there's a major vulnerability found and exploited.
What's your take on when artificial intelligence may or may not become self-aware?
So this is where I part with a lot of computer scientists. So what does self-aware mean, right? Yeah. So, you know, for example, part of what we're doing here by monitoring memory, monitoring I/O channels, looking at tables, you might want to call that self-aware, but there's something distinctly different in living things as opposed to dead things. You look at a computer and it does all kinds of wonderful things, and then you look at a ladybug, and it's still so far superior. That ladybug is self-aware. There's no doubt about it. As soon as you try to grab it, it knows you're trying to grab it, you know? So, and yet it knows in a way that even if a machine tries to avoid you, you still know it's dead. You can never confuse a dead thing, at least so far. Maybe as the technology advances, I know. But right now, the state of the technology, you know that this thing is dead. It has no life in it. It's a dead thing. And a ladybug or an ant is clearly alive. So I think we're a long way off. I know the singularity is the big thing.
Like 37 years.
Yeah.
They're pretty specific.
Yeah.
You think that's all a crock?
I think that machines will get better at fooling you into thinking that they know what's going on. And for some things, it's good. Like if you're being entertained, you put on a headpiece and a goggle, and you get immersed. For language learning, no need to travel to France. You put on this headpiece, and you know you're there, and you can be fooled. Even when you know you're being fooled, it still feels real, you know. And that you tie sensors, actuators, electronics, software, firmware with neuroscience, and the amount that you can be fooled is astronomical. But you.
And then put into that they were already finding out that that's exactly what people want.
Yeah. Oh.
I mean, we don't think that, but we actually do want to be fooled. Like one of the most interesting things I learned recently is the high degree of failure there is in memory, especially under high pressure situations. And I've always thought that my memory of events, critical events, was very good. But they claim that in general, they're most people, it's completely off from what actually happened. Yeah. So there's an inner desire to corrupt the information that you're being presented with anyway. So that's scary.
Yeah. Well, there's learning about ourselves in the process, right? Well, you know, essentially, what I want to say is that protections need to be, in order to be solid and to provide a fortified defense, they need to be hardware-based, and the hardware needs to be. The hardware that's doing the protections should be isolated from the hardware that it's protecting.
Right.
So there's a separation and isolation, and this is our approach right now. constantly, this is just a box, and we talked about that. So, this is that, this is the loop, the logic that we employ to protect the system. This is a loop that was developed by a Air Force fighter pilot. It's called the OTA loop, developed by Colonel John Boyd. And he was nicknamed 42nd Boyd because it was claimed that he could knock down any opponent within the first 40 seconds of a dogfight. And he went on to teach fighter pilots, and he had never been beaten. He had put this together, and it's a loop that essentially depicts how we learn and react to situations. And he takes this loop and says, well, the way to beat an opponent is to get inside his loop and manipulate his perceptions. So we take that as a model and use that as our control mechanism for protecting the computer. And it runs on this secure environment. The top part represents of course, the hardware, and the bottom is the computer that we're monitoring. The execution environment, labyrinth, and earlier I talked a little bit about encryption. So this is data as it's stored in the machine. It's in, this is something called hexadecimal. That's not important. If you look on the left, even though it's not really comprehensible, you can see that there's some sort of a pattern to the data. Whereas that same data encrypted on the right, there isn't, you just can't make any sense out of it. So without knowing what it is, you can tell that the data on the right is, you don't stand a chance at pulling it apart and trying to, whereas on the left, unencrypted, there's some structure there. You may not know what the structure is, but your minds can recognize that there is structure. Whereas the encrypted, the structure is gone. So here's what a computer program looks like at almost the machine level. Again, you see that there's structure. On the left is the data inside memory, represented as ones and zeros and hexadecimal. And on the right is a program that interpreted the data on the left and printed out what's going on. You take that and encrypt it, and you just get garbage. So that's the power of encryption. And encryption usually involves a secret key. As long as you keep that key secret, it's not going to get broken. Okay. So that's essentially it. Open to any and all questions?
Thank you very much.
You're developing this specific hardware-based system, but yet you still could have somebody who's been planted as a mold, for instance yourself, to specifically put into a code initially at design time, something that eventually would come alive like
Absolutely.
in 20 years down the range and could be probably undetected.
Yeah.
So there's always that capability of putting in malware in.
Yeah. What Dr. Pellegrino is saying is if the designers and the developers of the system themselves are the adversary, then how can you protect against that? That's very difficult. Just to give you one more statistic.